Now, to a lot of people, they can understand that processed food's bad for them. You know, you look at the back of the packet and you see emulsifier 472,
Mm.
and most people can come to the logical conclusion, maybe that's not good for me. But what for a lot of people, it's just so ingrained into their psyche that vegetables are good for you. You know, they cannot comprehend that broccoli is not good for their health. So if there's someone watching this and they're thinking, I refuse to believe this man that vegetables are bad for me, what would you say to that individual?
I mean, it's very understandable because again, we've just been inundated with the idea that we should eat a certain way and that that way is good and the other way is bad. But it's not based on hard evidence. It's not based on any good statistical analysis or experimental data. It's not even based on basic biology, physiology, and human evolution. It's just a supposition that was put forward. It didn't have evidence to back it up. So they lied and doctored that information to try to vilify meat. And so it defaulted into eating plants because obviously cholesterol was bad, therefore meat was bad. And I mean, I was a kid in the 80s. Like I remember this happening is as long as things didn't contain fat, saturated fat and cholesterol, it was de facto good for you. It was just by definition good for you. The only thing that was bad was cholesterol and saturated fat. That's it. And so as long as it didn't have that, it was by definition good for you. So there were in the candy aisle, there were candies that said fat free, fat free. I was like, it's candy. I was 5 and I'm looking at this. I'm like, that doesn't mean that it's good for you. It's candy. I remember Entenmann's came out. There was like coffee cake that was fat free, and it was just covered in frosting and sugar and all this sort of garbage. And I remember my mom seeing that. I'm like, oh my god, it's fat free cake, and she grabbed like 2 of them, and I was just like what the hell is going on? It's like that may be fat free, but there is no way that thing is good for you. But that was the argument. And so vegetables became de facto good for you because they didn't have fat and cholesterol. And fat and cholesterol were the only thing that were bad for you. And so we've just sort of kept pushing this idea. And then we had all these studies that come out again showing correlation, not causation, never causation, and healthy user bias. So you have these people say, "Oh, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat more fiber, eat more of this." And these are people that are working out. These are people that aren't smoking, that aren't drinking, that are taking care of themselves and doing all these other sorts of things. And yet, it's we have ended up getting fatter and sicker than we've ever been in human history. We've reduced um, red meat consumption. We've reduced fat and cholesterol by about 30%, 33% actually. Increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively. Over tripled the amount of unsaturated fats from vegetable oils, seed oils that we were consuming. Over tripled the amount of sugar in the form of high fructose corn syrup that we've been eating as well. And what happened? The obesity rate has gone up from around 8% up to 42%. Diabetes rates have gone up by a factor of 6 nearly. Heart disease rates have tripled. Cancer rates have tripled. Stroke rates have tripled. Autoimmune diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even neurodevelopmental delays such as autism have all increased exponentially. These things were very, very rare before the 1970s and 80s, and now they're the vast majority of things that we treat. 90% of deaths in the Western world are from these so-called non-communicable chronic diseases. 74% of deaths around the world are from non-communicable chronic diseases. And that is a massive, massive difference from where we were even 50 years ago. I mean, oh, we're just living so much longer. No, we're not. The life expectancy is not any significantly higher than it was in the 1970s, 60s, 50s, 40s, even the 1920s. Um, if you separate out infant mortality rates, if you just look how old people lived when they died of old age, everyone lived very very similar amount of time. The founding fathers of America, born in the mid 1700s, a lot of them lived to be in their 80s or 90s unless they were killed by something, by accident or in war or an infection in the case of George Washington. But he was out working in the fields, plowing and working when he was in his 60s, and it was just raining. He got soaked and drenched, and he ended up getting pneumonia from this, and he ended up dying from it several weeks later. So, he's in his 60s and still putting in a hard day's work, right? So, John Adams was 92, all these sorts of things. So these people were living well long enough to get these non-communicable chronic diseases. And the other thing is that, well, we're just getting better at diagnosing them. I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. You have someone with autoimmune issues, right? Who has like bloody diarrhea and 50, 30 times a day. you don't just miss that. And like, oh, we just figured out how to diagnose that now. We've known about that for forever, for hundreds of years anyway. And so, it's just an excuse. So these rates of diseases are not just going up in 50 years. They're going up decade by decade by decade. Just the amount that we're spending and on these things are estimated to over double by the time from 2010 to 2030. So we're spending tens of trillions of dollars treating these diseases, and that's doubling every in 20-year period. So, and the costs representative of this is getting worse as well because the loss opportunity costs have increased over that time period as well, and the amount of money lost from the economy from early deaths has actually doubled in that time as well. So we're eating more vegetables, we're eating more fruits, we're eating more fiber, we're listing all these problems, we're eating less meat, and everything's getting worse. So, if you want to know about, why, plants are bad for you, study botany. It's an entire field and discipline of science. It's one of the original hard sciences. Looking at botany, there are about 1 million different defense chemicals that plants use to protect themselves. We don't crop dust and spray all the forests and grasslands and things like that around the world because we don't have to, because those plants make their own defense chemicals. They make their own pesticides, their own insecticides. And that's why they're able to protect themselves and don't need us to do it for them. And so if you forget that, you're doing yourself a disservice because there are toxins in there and some are worse than others, which is why most plants on earth are inedible. And so what does that mean? That means that they're so toxic that they'll make you extremely sick or even kill you if you eat even a small amount of them. And so you can't do it. You can't eat them. And that doesn't mean that the plants that we do eat are non-toxic because we eat grapes and we eat avocados and we eat tomatoes and we think that those are fine. In fact, we think they're very healthy, but they'll kill cats and dogs. So there are toxins in them. We know there are toxins in them because they are toxic to our pets. And yet we're denying that there are toxins at all. Okay, well, maybe we can contend with these toxins and they're okay. Well, yeah, we can contend with them more than we can other plants, but that doesn't mean that they're not causing harm. You say, well, but I eat vegetables all the time. Well, people smoke all the time. They drink all the time. They do drugs all the time. And they think that they're fine until their health starts to decay and get worse. So it's not about tonight or tomorrow. It's about over the years, over the decades, this builds up and causes harm. And some things cause harm faster than others. And I think that processed foods is definitely in that category, the sugars, the seed oils, processed garbage, that's going to speed things up. And so you're going to do relatively, respectively better, again, compared to what? You're going to do better eating a whole food diet, especially if it includes meat, a whole food omnivorous diet. You're going to do much better than if you were to eat a more processed food garbage diet. Absolutely. But is that the best that you can absolutely do? I would argue that no, it's not. And so if you want to know about plant toxins, just look them up. These things are out there. You study botany, study horticulture. Any textbook on botany can tell you exactly what I've just told you and a lot more too. You can get into the details. There's a Professor George Diggs, he's a professor of botany and biology in Texas, and he has a whole series of lectures online that are available on YouTube and elsewhere. The WHO has an entire web page talking about the different plant toxins that exist in the foods that we eat, or the toxins that food exist in the food that we eat. So the naturally occurring toxins in food. And on there, they talk about plant toxins. They talk about toxins in mushrooms, and they talk about toxins in algae. Nowhere on there do they talk about toxins in meat, by the way, not even cholesterol, but they do talk about the toxins in plants and about how these different categories of plants and the different health ramifications that they have on humans and livestock. And these are the foods that we eat. These are not the so-called inedible plants. And so it's very clear that these plants do contain toxins. That's just a hard fact. That's not up for debate. What's up for debate is how harmful they are, and that's certainly something that can be discussed. But the idea that there are no toxins in there is simply incorrect. And so you have to look at these things much more carefully. Now you can look at these things and again cherry pick. Now there's things in plants that are good for life because they're living things and they have things that are good for other living things. And that's why animals eat other living things, because they can't create nutrition out of nowhere. They can't take, minerals and sunlight and turn that into life. Only plants and other sorts of forms of life can do that. Animals can't. And so animals are all heterotrophs. They have to eat something else. Something else, something has to die for animals to live. That is just the fact. That is just the way of the world. And it would be nice if that weren't the case, but it is the case, and we just have to be realistic about this. And so you eat these things, and they have, yes, they have things that are good for you, but they also have things that are bad for you because they have to protect themselves. You get the bad with the good, and so you can cherry pick and say, oh well, there's this little thing in broccoli, and that makes it a superfood, and it's so good for you, and all that sort of stuff. No, because you get the bad with the good, and they're ignoring that, they're omitting that, and that's a lie of omission. And so, that's a very important thing to remember. Now, meat is a superfood because fatty meat has every nutrient you need in the proportion that you need it, and that's very important too. And it has perfect bioavailability. That means you can get these nutrients into your body by eating them. You eat plants. One of the ways that plants defend themselves is by not being as nutritious because they lock up their nutrients in ways that we can't access. We don't have the enzymes to break down, so they're not bioavailable. So spinach has a lot of iron. It has a lot of calcium. And now they're arguing, oh, yes, you want to eat a lot of spinach because it has a lot of calcium in it. Okay. But they've actually done studies in humans where they've given them spinach to try to get their calcium levels up because we know from mass spectrometers that there is a lot of calcium in there. But then when they gave spinach to people, they found that their actual calcium levels went down because the calcium is bound up in ways that we cannot access. So it's not bioavailable. And they also come with anti-nutrients that make it, again, less nutritious and healthy for you to eat a plant or even anything else because they have phytic acid. They can bind to different minerals and nutrients. And so you can't absorb them. You can't use them. You have tannins that bind and denature proteins. So you can't break them down. You can't use them. You have oxalates. There's a lot of oxalates in spinach, and those will bind to minerals like calcium. They'll get into your blood and bind the calcium and strip it out of your body. They'll also bind iron. This is how people get rid of rust stains on their house or on their clothing, is by making oxalic acid and washing, putting a bit of that in water and washing something in that, washing your clothes in there, or like spraying down the side and scrubbing the side of a building or something like that has like rust stains on it. And it just strips that rust right off because it binds the iron and strips it off. Which is doing that in your body as well. And so it can bind to the calcium and form calcium oxalate stones. This can deposit in different areas in your body, including your kidneys. Your body's trying to eliminate it out through your kidneys, and you form calcium oxalate stones, which are actually 75% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. And when I was doing my emergency medicine rotation, actually worked in the emergency department for a year after intern year, and that's something that came up. People coming in with kidney stones, they have recurrent kidney stones. You need to talk to them about their diet and if they're eating a lot of spinach because they can get oxalate stones from eating spinach. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's something we know about. That's in medical textbooks, and yet we tell people eat so much spinach; it's so great for you, omitting the fact that it has these deleterious issues as well, and that the so-called health benefits may not actually even be bioavailable or absorbable at all. So it's a large subject. It's a large topic. I've done different talks on it. One was just very clear: plants are trying to kill you, and that was actually a medical lecture or a lecture at a medical conference. Two other doctors, and so I was very concerned about how that would go down. But it was, people understood it, and I had professors of medicine coming up to me afterwards, going like, "I never want to eat a damn vegetable again because these are the facts," and it's just not facts that get publicized all that often, but those are the facts.